Good afternoon and welcome to CHCCSM005, develop, facilitate and review all aspects of case management. This is going to be my last recording for this particular unit. You have another lead trainer that's going to take over. The gentleman's name is Mark. And I'm sure he will introduce himself commencing in week 6. It's important to note that all people who use services, access services, have the right to appeal on decisions that impact and affect their lives. People have the right to not be happy with the service. People have a right to appeal some of the decisions that will impact on them. Remember, the decisions that are made impact on the individual, and we're supposed to be working in a consultative manner with our clients. So it's important that we disclose everything to our clients and that we provide them the opportunity to appeal any of the decisions that may be made on their behalf. These rights are usually expressed in service standards for the particular sector. Normally, the rights to appeal or the rights to complain are provided to your client, I suppose, at their first presentation, or depending on the service that they're going to. In my particular industry, they would have been provided with this information at the initial assessment, and then they would be provided with that information once they are linked into a service within our organisation. So appeals are most commonly handled internally. So they're done within the organisation, and that's usually the first point of contact. And they're only referred to outside bodies if the issue or the appeal or the complaint of your client can't be resolved internally. So there are a number of avenues for people to appeal decisions, and these include formal commissions, tribunals and authorities, such as the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, with the courts being the final avenue of appeal. So it starts off at a lower level, and then it moves up. In complex formal appeals, a client may require the assistance of a qualified advocate and may require your assistance as that advocate for them. So all appeals have to be made transparent, and they also have to adhere to rules that are applied fairly and without bias. So without favour, you can't favour an organisation, or you can't favour the tribunal, or the courts will look at both sides and then will make a decision based on the information that's provided. And in all of these appeals, the proper procedures have to be followed. These aspects of dealing with appeals reflect common law concepts relating to due process. So there's processes and procedures in place that have to be followed when someone lodges an appeal. Part of your role as a community services worker is to make sure that people receiving services are aware of their rights as well as their responsibilities, and be informed of the related policies and procedures. Remember, the information being provided must be in a manner that they can understand, taking into account such factors as literacy, language, and any barriers to communication. So if a person is deaf, you might have to have a person that can sign, as in form sign language, so the person understands. If the person comes from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, you may require an interpreter. Or if information is written, you may require for it to be written in the language of your client. Or again, involve the services of an interpreter so that it can be explained to the client the proper policies and procedures. So in most cases, appeals are related to a person or other stakeholders, and it's about their dissatisfaction with the decisions made, not happy with the decisions that have been made. So they'd like to appeal those decisions. So, for example, a person who is not happy with the decision to appoint a guardian who will make decisions on their behalf can appeal to the guardianship and administrative tribunal in their state or territory. In this case, the case manager would be required to be aware of this, have a sound understanding of the appeals process, and be able to assist the person with the documentation required for an appeal. So you are there always to support your client. If they need to do an appeal, you would be there to assist them and support them through that process as well. So the following really is just an overview of the steps in the case of an appeal. So step one is to contact the service provider, agency or government organisation that made that first decision, the one that you're not happy with. That's always the starting point, okay? Because if you go to a higher body than where you first started at, they're going to actually refer you back. So it's important to go to the initial agency or initial service provider and lodge your appeal or complaint at that point. Step two is for you to support your client to seek out legal advice. And our client cohort would in most cases be using legal aid. And legal aid is determined on financial constraints. And most law firms, or quite a large number of law firms, will do legal aid pro bono, so it's free to the client to use that service. It's actually paid for by the government to that particular legal service, and they are required to provide legal aid. As a case manager, you should be aware of the low-cost legal support available to your client group. So if the person can't get legal aid, there may be a conflict of interests. You would try another office rather than sort of automatically refer them to a lawyer that's going to cost money. Our clients, in the majority of cases, can't afford to pay anything. It doesn't mean that they're not entitled to fair legal representation. So you have to know the processes and where to access advocacy groups and government and community-based legal services. If you are interested, you could have a look at a website called Info Exchange. It's spelled I for Indigo, N for November, F for Francis, O for Origin, X for X-ray, C for Charlie, H for Harry, A for Angry, N for Nelly, G for George, E for Egg. And if you just type that into your web browser, you'll come up with a website called Info Exchange. And within Info Exchange, you can look at Service Seeker. So you could type in legal aid, and you could type that in the area where your client resides. And it should be able to provide you with legal aid officers close to the client. Now, we've just been discussing legal aid and looking for legal aid officers, and we talked about Info Exchange. So we have to investigate exactly what is required to be able to access these services, and again, if there are costs involved in making an appeal. And also to have a close look at the fact that not all decisions actually can be appealed. For example, a client can appeal a decision made by a government-funded organisation based on incorrect interpretation of policy, but they can't directly appeal a government policy. So it's only the way the policy has been interpreted that can be appealed. An appeal can also be made if your clients or others believe due process was not followed when the decision was made. So they didn't follow the procedures and the processes to the way that they're supposed to be undertaken. And there are also timeframes within which appeals can be made, and they vary from sector to sector. You should always find out about any time frames when a client is considering making an appeal, so you as well as your client and any legal representatives can ensure that they are time effective. So if someone comes to you and says they wanted to make an appeal a decision, find out what decision it was that they'd like to appeal, when they use the service, and ensure that you're not promising your client or stating to your client that we will definitely do this for you when a time may have lapsed where this can no longer be appealed. So you really need to look at all of the information that your client's providing to you and checking what you actually need to do all of the time. So if your client wishes to continue with an appeal once all the related information has been gathered, it's your job to really provide assistance with making contact with the relevant appeal organisation. It's up to you to provide a brief summary of the circumstances leading to the decision, as well as the information relating to why your client is appealing the decision, and provide information on your client's desired outcomes. So you have to have everything in order to ensure that you are trying to achieve the best possible outcome for your client. So it's really important to remember that every single person who receives a service has the right to make a complaint or report a concern relating to the service. In the community, you also have a right to make complaints about the service that you receive. It might be in a restaurant, it might be in a retail outlet, but you have the right to complain. A lot of people don't take up this right, and I suppose if we always say that we're putting a complaint in, you can always rephrase that to providing some constructive criticism. This is mainstream, not when you're working within the community services sector, but I'm just trying to show you that everybody, doesn't matter, that has a right to make a complaint. So having this right contributes to dignity and respect. Community service organisations, in the majority of cases, do have specific policies and procedures that manage complaints internally. The person raising the complaint always has the right to have a support person to be present at any interview. So remember that that's an important part, because our client groups may not be able to speak as well as they would like, and sometimes you can bring a support person in. They may not be allowed to say anything, but the person can just be sitting there and providing that support, which may just reduce a person's anxiety, nerves, or have somebody that they can talk to after they've been to see someone to lodge their complaint. So this, depending on what sort of services, it may just be an informal advocate. It could be a family member, a friend, or it may be a formal advocate. So that's depending on the type of complaint you're making, and I suppose the seriousness of your complaint. If it's a minor complaint, take a friend or a family member. If it's a major complaint, my suggestion would be to take a formal advocate. So the following are just some steps that may be included in resolving a complaint. The first step, you would raise your concern with the person responsible. An example might be if a client is not pleased with the way a worker has talked to them, or feels that a worker has not carried out a service in an appropriate manner. Having a conversation with the worker is usually the first step in fixing the issue. However, if your client doesn't feel confident approaching the staff member, the concerned organisation should provide avenues for your client to raise their concern with a manager, an advocate, or through a more formal complaints procedure. So sometimes it's very, very hard to raise a complaint with someone that you are dealing with face to face. You may have said something in passing, but if you're lodging a formal complaint and you can't speak to that person directly, then you would go to their next in line, whether that be the team leader, the manager. Here at STOTS, I think our complaints process is pretty good. If you had an issue with a trainer, you would attempt to speak to the trainer first. If you didn't feel comfortable or your trainer didn't respond in a manner that you hoped they would, then you would take it to your senior educator. If your senior educator couldn't resolve it, or they didn't resolve it to what you believe is a satisfactory level, then you would take it to the course coordinator and you would continue working up. Once a complaint is lodged, it is reviewed and you will receive appropriate and timely feedback and information. As I've just mentioned, which includes step 2, is if the issue isn't resolved at that first stage, so that's talking to the worker or the person that you've had the complaint against, it'll be reviewed and it'll be taken up to the next level within the organisation. And as I've already just mentioned, in most cases within an organisation, a manager or supervisor will deal with the actual complaint. So once again, only if the complaint can't be resolved within the organisation will it be moved up to the next level. So as previously stated, you start following the processes for the complaint. You can't go from I want to complain about this person and go to an external body. The external body will refer you directly back to the service provider. So, and that's where if that complaint then isn't resolved, yes, of course, you refer to an external complaints body or an advocacy service. So your trainer may wish to put you into breakout groups for this little bit of group work, which asks you to list at least 2 rights that a person has that are based on the principles of human rights and standards of service delivery. When managing a complaint, briefly describe what should be done if the issue is not resolved at an internal level, which we've just been discussing, and also list 2 rights of a person about whom a complaint has been made. So again, use your resources, use the PowerPoints, and these are good things to know when you are out in the field itself. So it's a good task. Your trainer may ask you to do this individually. We're now looking at conducting case management meetings. So when you are working with clients in a case management context, it's really important to gather as much information as you possibly can. And you'll be gathering this information from other service providers. You'll be gathering this information from clients. You may be gathering information from family and friends. And sometimes it's also about sharing information. And part of that gathering of information is to make sure that you establish a really good rapport between everyone involved. Remember, we're looking at the client from a holistic approach. So the more services that are involved, and the more we can build and establish a good rapport with everyone involved, the better the outcome is going to be for the client. Part of your role is to communicate in an open manner, showing respect and effective resolution of conflict, assists in building this rapport and supports the ability to gather relevant information to best address a client's needs. It's important to note that the open communication process requires to be maintained throughout the case management process. So case management meetings can be held at various points along the way to establish goals, make decisions, monitor progress, and evaluate outcomes. So, the communication process has to remain the same. It has to be open, it has to be honest, it has to be inclusive, and it has to be come from a place where you are looking at the client as the most important person, which is what they are, but it's how you work not only with the client, but with other service providers as well. So I suppose the reason and purpose of case management is that we are trying to achieve the best possible outcome for the clients to address their self-identified needs and goals. And to ensure that this occurs, case management usually involves a number of people with different expertise. And people with different expertise should be involved in the case planning and review. By having regular meetings, All stakeholders are provided with the opportunity to share insights about what is working, what is not working, and can support a shared sense of purpose. As a case manager, it is your role to facilitate the client's active involvement, monitor via meetings, interviews, and informal discussions to ensure that ongoing review of those self-identified needs and goals. It's extremely important that you always remember that the main person you're meeting is the person seeking and receiving support. Be aware that if your client has difficulty with his or her communication, you, as the case manager, must provide appropriate supports. It may be that you are providing some form of interpreter if they come from a call background and English isn't their first language. You may find that you might have to have someone that signs if they are deaf. But you really need to make sure that the client is understanding what's going on. You're talking to your client, not about your client, is one of the key things to remember. So as a case manager, you're working for your client. This being the case, all information has to be shared with your client relating to the purpose of the meeting and the reasons why certain people have been asked to attend. You, as the case manager, must receive consent from your client. If your client, for some reason, is unable to provide consent, an advocate, interpreter, or a guardian must be included. Your client must be provided with enough time to understand and respond to all of the information. So what this is really telling you is don't rush through the information. And if you need to provide your client time to ask questions, and you need to provide your client with time to process the information that you're providing them with as well. So don't rush. Okay, you'll get there. And remember, you are there to support the client, and that's actually exactly what you are being paid to do. So don't rush your client, and make sure that you provide them with all of the information. So when we talk about rapport, I suppose put really simply, it just means a pleasant relationship in which people understand each other's feelings and communicate effectively. Without effective communication, you're not going to be able to support your client. So, having a good understanding of facial expressions, verbal communication, non-verbal communication, really will allow you to share information in a case meeting. So there has to be this rapport between the client attending the meeting as well as those people attending the meeting, especially with the case manager. So, you are going to be the main contact person for your client. So it's also in your best interest to make sure that you introduce people to the client. And also, you may have to speak to your client to say, they may actually not like somebody for whatever the reason may be. But it's up to you, if they're an effective worker, sometimes they don't actually have to be liked, I suppose, is a simple way of putting it. But as the case manager, you would allay those fears or those feelings and talk about those feelings and talk about how this person can best support your client. So, really you are sort of a gatekeeper as well. You're assisting your client to achieve the best possible outcome. Therefore, you are using a range of services and a range of people with different skills and knowledge. But it really is about then discussing each of those people with your client. So rapport can be established by listening really appropriately to everything that is being said, being non-judgmental, and always, please, don't interrupt your client when they are talking, okay? You may, what people fall in the trap of, that a person starts talking to them and they go into solution focused mode. So they want to fix the issue or fix the problem or help them, is a common term used. Really, you can't help anybody if you're not, or you can't actually assist anybody, because I don't like the word help. But you can't really assist anybody when you're not listening to what they're saying. So you really need to stay focused on what your client is saying. as well as looking for verbal, non-verbal cues as well, so you have to be really attentive to the client. Once the client has finished speaking, then it's your turn, okay? Please also be mindful that a client is there because they require assistance, okay? And you're communicating with that client. Please don't start telling them your story and what you've been through. They're not there to listen to you. You are there to listen to them. So part of this process is having this ability to reflect and paraphrase. And it provides this opportunity for you as a clinician and also for your client to clarify and address any misunderstanding. So your interpretation might actually not be what the client is saying. So by paraphrasing and reframing, it provides you with this opportunity to clarify. So make mental notes, or ask your client, can I make some notes while you're talking? Just say that you want to be more efficient, and then you can go back to it after the client has finished speaking. So when you are working with your client, it's really important. Doesn't matter whether they have simple or complex needs. You're not to be judgmental or to use language that is patronising or derogatory, or language that isn't understood by the client. The language you use is going to be interpreted by the client. So if they think that you are using a language that is possibly above them, I don't know in other words how to put it, but you are talking in a manner that they don't actually understand, it's going to be hard for that client to be able to establish that rapport with you. But it's always important as a clinician, a worker, that you demonstrate that you actually have listened, you have heard, and you have understood your client's needs, and that you are genuinely interested in supporting them. If you are distracted by your phone, your client is going to shut down. Put your phone away, turn it on silent. You are with a client, so whatever else is happening can wait. Don't be distracted. If you're fortunate enough to have an office that may have windows, don't be looking outside at the sunshine or the cars that are travelling by or people that are walking by, because the client will know that you're actually not paying attention to them, and they're going to stop. Okay, so for the time that client is with you, whether it be 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour, however long, they deserve and are entitled to your undivided attention. So please remember that. Meetings that are formal are planned, and they need to follow rules for procedure, which are usually agreed upon before the meeting. Normally there's an agenda is circulated before the meeting to ensure that the attendees can prepare appropriately and participate in any discussions. So you'll be sent out an agenda, it may have something along the lines of meet and greet at 9 a.m, discussion of who's who in the zoo. So introducing your introductions, I suppose is another way to put that. Then it might say, opening comments to be made by, so that people know where they're in. And also the agenda should include what you're actually discussing on that day. That way people can actually prepare and have responses ready, or have ideas that they can contribute to the conversation. Normally you have a chairperson, and they have the responsibility to make sure that the agenda is actually followed and that everyone has a chance to contribute to the discussion. Normally we would have someone that's taking the minutes, and these minutes are either written down, sometimes they are voice recorded and then typed up by somebody, and within those minutes of the meeting are the agreed actions that have come out of the meeting, the responsibilities, who's doing what, as well as the timelines. They're all documented. So if you say you're going to be doing this by, you will have this done by next Thursday, you've actually provided a timeline. So please be careful about, I can do that tomorrow. Well, you know what? Always give yourself a little bit of extra time, unless it's an absolute emergency. Always give yourself a little time, because things don't always go the way we would like them to. So, our time can be, the time that we thought we could allocate to something may be taken up by something else. So just always be wary about all of these things when you are attending a formal meeting. We're all busy people. People in community services are busy. So it's really important that we follow an agenda. And this can help us with making sure that the meeting will run smoothly and on time. There are lots of times when we may get distracted and the meeting will not run exactly to the agenda, but this could just simply be because an agenda item requires a lot more attention than others. So we may have a list that this is being discussed, this is being discussed, this is being discussed, and so on. But it might just be that one of the agenda items seems that it does require more attention. There's more input required, or there's more discussion around a particular agenda item. So just be aware of that. If all of the agenda items are planned for the meeting are not addressed, it's simply arranging another meeting. Unless there's something there that is urgent, and then I would raise that, and sometimes meetings will go over time. But if that's not the case, you can always arrange another meeting, whether it be for that same week or the following week. And that may also then allow all of the clinicians to look at what they're doing and maybe provide some feedback on the items that they're all going to undertake. So, it's always a good chance for a review, but also another chance to then continue on with that agenda that you missed out on at that particular meeting. So your meeting agendas that are sent out obviously should have the date of the meeting, the day and the date of the meeting, the start and finish times, as well as the location. It also should contain the name of the person convening and chairing the meeting, why you are having the meeting, so the purpose of the meeting, what you hope to get out of the meeting, so the objectives, the running order, so a list of the items to be discussed and at what particular time they will be discussed or in what order, and as well as the proposed time allocation for the items to be discussed. So if you've got a 2-hour meeting, it might be introductions and welcome 5 minutes. It might be, agenda item 1, 15 minutes, and so on. But the more that you can bring a construct to your agenda, people's expectations, they don't have to wonder about, well, how long are we going to be talking about this for, or why are we doing that? So that's an agenda is really important because it gives people a brief of what's actually going to occur at the meeting. Okay, so when you are arranging a meeting, there are 3 stages involved. So remember, you are arranging the meeting, so it's up to you to get these 3 stages. The tasks to complete prior to the meeting, the tasks to undertake whilst the meeting is occurring, and tasks that require to be completed after the conclusion of the meeting. So as we move further into case management meetings, remember you are a case manager, not a caseworker, you are a case manager. So as far as a case manager goes, it's your responsibility to make sure that you have your client's consent to include all people that will participate in the meeting. So through a release of information, usually a written document, you may receive verbal consent. And as I've been telling everybody, if you receive verbal consent from a client, please ensure that you put that into your case notes, that you have received verbal consent at the time and the date that you received verbal consent. You as the case manager must prepare your client as well for the meeting and provide information about the purpose. What's the purpose of the meeting? How is it going to work? What's the process? And what do you hope to achieve, or what do you hope that you'll get out of it for the client? So all of these things need to be explained to your client, as well as who's going to be in attendance, who's going to be there. You may want to talk about what their roles are, what they can offer. It's really important. Remember, you know who these people are. You know what they can offer. But we are disempowering our client if we do not advise our client of who these people are. Okay, because our clients may not have ever met them before. So it's a bunch of strangers sitting around a table talking about them. So put yourself in a client's shoes and reflect on how you might feel as if you had a group of strangers all sitting around talking about you. Um, so yeah, as the case manager, you are required to inform all people and services that are required to be involved in the meeting, the information required, and they will be required to confirm attendance with you. I always say the best laid plans of mice and men. We might arrange a meeting a month in advance. We might send out a reminder 2 weeks later. We might send out a reminder even a day before. You may have withdrawals from that meeting at that point in time. Even on the day, there could be an emergency and some of the people may not be able to attend. You have to make a decision then as well. Do you carry on with the meeting or do you postpone the meeting? Can you achieve the goals of the meeting if people aren't there? Okay? Don't hold a meeting for the meeting's sake. That's just wasting time. So if you really can't address all of the client's needs and goals, sometimes it is worthwhile to postpone the meeting. However, if you can achieve a couple of the goals with the amount of staff that are going to be there, really go forward with the meeting. As I've just mentioned, the meeting will be chaired by an appointed chairperson, and it's the role of the chairperson to make sure that introductions are made, and they also have the duty of stating the aims and the purpose of the meeting, and it's up to the chairperson to provide information on the time allocated to the meeting and to inform also all attendees that minutes of the meeting will be taken. These minutes are usually sent out to all of those people that participated, sometimes in hard copy, sometimes via email. Nowadays, it's more likely to be email, and that way you will also, you've been making your notes as you've been going through the meeting. However, you have it confirmed that you are undertaking this task and you have this timeline to do it. So please use calendars. You've got calendars on your phones, you've got calendars on your devices. Please set yourself reminders because it's really, really easy for time to run away from you and you think, oh, I haven't done this and I was supposed to. If you follow your calendar and address what you need to be done, you'll never have to worry. Okay? It's when you think, oh, this is more important than that, you need to prioritize and ensure that you have a work ethic so that you do everything methodically as well. So whilst the meeting is undertaken, the chairperson addresses every single agenda item. Discussion may take place relating to what is working well, areas for improvement, if any changes are required. All of these discussions are documented along with the action plans. And when we talk about what's working well, we're talking about things that are working well for the client. Okay? What's not working well? What's working well? Why is it working well? Could we do more of that? So it's a really open discussion. And all of the information provided at the meeting forms the basis for the minutes that are prepared. So if you're having ongoing meetings and they're required, a date will be agreed upon for the next one. It'll be decided at the meeting that you're at that we will be meeting again in a month's time, or we will be meeting again in 3 weeks' time. And as I've mentioned to you, there may come a time with a particular client where you may have to have an emergency meeting. Something has gone possibly horribly wrong, or something may have gone fantastically right, where you may have an emergency meeting and maybe it's ceasing engagement with the client because they've achieved something or they've moved into state. These sorts of things are, be aware that there may be emergency meetings, and then you have to juggle. I mean, this is not something where you're sitting around. If you think community services work is sitting around drinking coffee and just talking to people, you are in for a big surprise. So once the case manager meeting has finished, the case is required to enter details that were agreed upon in the client support plan. The minutes taken should be sent to all of the people, as I previously mentioned, who attended the meeting, detailing what is to occur, who should action, so who should undertake or do which item, and the outcome. As the case manager, it will be a requirement of your role to follow up on issues that came from the meeting and check that the plans of actions have been implemented. So you are a case manager. People that may be involved, and I'm not saying this in all cases because it can be all sorts of different people involved, but you may have a lot of caseworkers. So the caseworkers will be answerable to you as the case manager. Don't wait for the caseworker to come to you. Some of them will be extremely enthusiastic and they'll be telling you what they've been doing and they'll be sending you emails. But really it's up to you to follow up with the caseworkers. Where are you at with this task? What have you done? I see you haven't done anything, but we had an agreed timeline, okay? So you are the manager. Okay, so as a manager, expect that you are going to provide the outcome, and these people are working towards the same goal with you as the lead. And it's up to you as the case manager. You also have to understand and make sure that your client understands the outcomes of the meeting and what the implications of the decisions that were made. So you know what is going to happen depending on who's involved, depending on the issues that the client is seeing you for. There can be a variety of implications and outcomes of a meeting. So again, another activity, hopefully your trainer will put you into some breakout rooms to discuss this. If not, and you're watching this, maybe it's something that you could do individually, and I think, well, you can do it individually. And I suggest you have a look at these small activities because it's actually going to support you in when you are undertaking your assessment tasks. So the first one here is to provide and discuss 2 reasons why case management meetings are beneficial to all stakeholders. 2 is to provide and discuss 2 aspects of information that the case manager can provide to the client to prepare them for the meeting. And you're finally asked to provide and discuss 2 aspects of a formal meeting procedure. It's extremely important that when working with the case management framework, that there are clear defined roles, responsibilities, and boundaries to ensure effective case management. All of these need to be discussed or should be discussed and agreed upon during the planning stage. So every person is required to understand what is expected of them, the tasks they are required to undertake, the ways in which communication should take place, when to step back and allow another worker to carry out a role or part of a role. The boundaries need to be clearly defined to ensure there is reduced conflict and are essential for ethical practice. You don't want 2 people doing the same task. You don't want one person out there doing everything, okay? That's why you are a case manager. That's why you are allocating different tasks to different people. It's up to you to ensure that those tasks are completed. Please don't alienate a worker because you don't think they're doing their task. Provide them with supervision and support rather than just take things away from somebody. You're not supporting a fellow worker, okay? So provide support, provide assistance where required. So what is a case plan? It's a document, that's all it is. It's a document that is inclusive of your client's assessment, needs, and goals. So when you are preparing a case plan, it should also include tasks that are required to be completed by the client. Remember, we talk about empowerment and disempowerment. So you need to set your client tasks to complete as well. If we do everything for our clients, then they're completely disempowered. They rely on us to do everything for them. That's not empowering somebody, that's disempowering. Okay, so don't think that a client can't achieve or a client can't do. Just make sure you include those tasks in your case plan that need to be done by the client. You as the case manager support workers, health providers and other agencies as well as the client. To make sure that an appropriate case plan is developed, the plan must be seen as collaborative activity, okay? Togetherness. You're working with other people. It has to be a collaborative activity. There is no such thing as one person doing everything. There's nothing collaborative about that. That's autocratic. One person is controlling absolutely everything. That's not the job of a case manager. The job of a case manager is to work collaboratively to achieve the best possible outcome for the client. So you're working collaboratively with all people and agencies that are providing support to the client. To ensure there is a coordinated approach, all roles, responsibilities, boundaries, as well as processes must be clearly identified, and as well as being clearly identified, must be clearly explained as well. Your client's expectations should be clear. This is so that they can attempt to achieve their part of the plan. Roles and expectations from all those involved should be documented clearly and signed off to ensure on the agreed responsibilities. So, it's about dissemination of information to people that are involved, including your client. So when it comes to decision making, there's usually input that's required from a multidisciplinary team. A multidisciplinary team just means people with different skills. You may have a community services worker, you may have a mental health clinician, you may have a drug and alcohol worker, you may have a housing worker, you may have a financial counsellor, you may have a school principal, you may have a school teacher, you might have DHHS. It's a multidisciplinary team to try and achieve the best possible outcome. And sometimes these particular disciplines overlap. If this does happen, it's the responsibility of the case manager to work with the different practitioners, different people, different workers to gain agreement and receive clarification on who is providing what service and where the boundaries are. Where does one worker stop and where does the other one pick up? How far? Okay, how far do they go? Is it within their scope of practice? Okay, really, if you're putting a team together, you are looking at the skills and knowledge and ability of that person, but also their range of practice, their experience as well. So it's really a matter of delegating out who's doing what, but then also getting this clarification about what service is doing what and where the boundaries are, so that we don't cross over those boundaries. Sometimes we might do that with consultation and in a collaborative manner, but it needs to be discussed. It can't just happen. So we're talking about a multidisciplinary team. So the following are a number of examples of professionals that may be required to participate in the case planning process. The case managers will provide input in relation to the client's treatment plan, recovery progress, and recommendations. Allied health professionals can provide input relating to mental health, drug and alcohol, etc. Medical professionals provide input relating to physical health. Child safety officers provide input relating to the assessment and management. And legal representatives provide information relating to your client's rights. As a case manager or caseworker, it's your responsibility to be aware of services available to meet your client's needs. I continuously talk about being amazing referral workers and dissemination of information to your clients, and that's really important. You need to have skills in researching services and resources and the ability to network with a variety of agencies that can best support your client. Remember, everything is about the client. We want to provide them with the best possible outcome. And that's why we need to know what agencies are out there, how they work, length of times, length of waiting times, locations, accessibility. All of these things need to be taken into consideration. Just referring a client to a service doesn't mean that you have done your job. I can refer clients to lots of services, but unless I check where they are or do they have particular accessibility, what their hours are there fees involved, there's more to referring than just simply referring. So having these skills and knowledge, you'll be able to support your client to make an informed decision for addressing their needs, their concerns, and their goals. Community services organisations not only include government departments such as, depending on your state, the Child Protection Authorities, Centrelink health departments, mental health departments, disability services, housing services, or I should say in Victoria, the Office of Housing, juvenile justice services, but there's a lot of services provided by non-government organisations. And a large percentage of the non-government organisations are usually funded partially by state and federal governments. So it might be a particular mental health service, or it might be a particular alcohol and other drug service, or a housing service, employment service. These are all services that you may be linking your client into. So there are a vast amount of services, agencies and organisations that case managers will require to be aware of and have the ability to navigate around, to find your way around things. How do they operate? How do they work? To make sure that the information they possess is current and relevant. Services address a variety of needs, whilst some services focus on a particular kind of need, or in some cases a particular section of the community. So when you are working with vulnerable groups, vulnerable people, it's really important that you know how to work your way through the systems, how to access the services. What do they do? How do they do it? Okay. As I've just previously mentioned in the last slide, it's up to you to do the research. Research may be taken obviously via the internet, but a really good way to find out information about a service, if possible, is to go and visit them. If you can go and visit the service, you identify or you make an appointment to say you'd like to have a look around, you're really interested in the service and you're interested in being able to refer clients to a particular service, but you'd just like to be able to tell the client a bit more. Community members that are in receipt of support services have rights that are provided by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Human rights are about being treated in a fair manner, treating others in a fair manner, and having the ability to make real choices in daily lives. Respect for the Declaration supports the values, the principles of all community work, which must be applied by all community services when providing support. All areas of human rights must apply to all people that participate in the decision-making process. The following provides a description of how human rights and how they are incorporated into work practices, policies, as well as procedures. So practices, the workplace is required to support individual needs and human rights. Workplaces will ensure dignity, privacy, security, and safety to all. And when we talk about the practices within the workplace, don't always just think about the clients, think about your colleagues as well. Okay? They also need to be treated by you with dignity. Information that may be shared must remain private. Everyone must be able to feel secure and safe in an environment. In the workplace, procedures are considered to be step-by-step instructions that underpin the practices. Ensuring there are work, health and safety procedures ensures people remain safe. Policies inform practices and procedures. So policies like the anti-discrimination policy makes sure that all individuals are treated fairly and equally. I was going to say equitably, but equally. It is extremely important that your client always receives the best information and knowledge relating to their needs and goals. It's a large part of the case management process. Please put the effort in, please put the time in. Remember, you are dealing with people in the community that are most vulnerable. So it's not acceptable to not put 100% in. So you need to find out information. You need to have knowledge that relates to their needs and goals. And if you don't have these, the knowledge or the information, seek it out. It may be from another worker, it may be from the internet, it may be from another service provider, but it's your responsibility to ensure that the client addresses their needs and goals in the best possible way. In case management, your client will be supported by you to identify and make clear their goals and then decide on the best means to achieve them. It's important to remember that when working with a client, it is all about collaboration, working together. As a case manager, it is your role to provide assistance to your client to develop and implement a case management plan. We're not developing the case management plan by ourselves. We are assisting the client to develop and implement a case management plan. At different times, this may include other workers who provide services and provide assistance in implementing aspects of the plan with you as the case manager, overseeing, monitoring and evaluating. As a case manager, your role is to make suggestions and provide options and choices. It is, however, definitely not your role to make the decisions for your client. Remember empowerment and disempowerment. It is important that you remember that the case management you use is about focusing on promoting self-determination, autonomy, and empowerment, and addressing your client in a holistic manner. So once again, your trainer may put you into breakout groups. If the trainer doesn't do that, that's okay. You can do this as an individual activity as well. Okay, so don't ever think, oh, well, I'm supposed to be doing this in a breakout group. I'm not doing it in a breakout group, therefore I won't do it. Please attempt these sorts of things individually if required. So it asks you in small groups to discuss at what stage of the case management planning should roles, responsibilities, and boundaries be agreed upon. Briefly describe the input that a person has in the decision-making process. And you'll have 15 minutes to discuss, and then you'll be asked to provide your responses to the class. So you either respond to the first 2 points in writing. You may wish to discuss them with your trainer in your student consultation hours. Please attempt these activities. All parties, persons involved in the delivery of case management process has their own needs, requirements, responsibilities, and rights. To make sure that there is effective case management, all of these are required to be identified and addressed. It is extremely important to attempt to achieve the best possible outcome for your client. That these are agreed upon in the early stages of developing a case management plan, so everybody has a sound understanding and to make sure there is no confusion. As a case manager, it's really important to be aware that in most cases, circumstances, family can be a major component within the case management planning. To this end, you will be required to understand family structure as dynamics, as well as how the family communicates and makes decisions. So the parties or people that should be included in the case management process are the organisations that are delivering and providing services, the client receiving services, the family of the person receiving the services, where possible and appropriate, and the community. So the organisation that you are employed in has the responsibility of providing services in a way that ensures that the client's needs and rights meet ethical and legislative requirements as well as service standards. Included in the organisation's responsibility is to make sure that the appointed case manager and other workers involved have the required skills and knowledge to be effective in their given roles, and that the required resources needed to implement the case plan are also readily available. Resources should be made available as per agreement with the relevant funding body, and have expectations from the clients being supported to keep their agreements and work respectfully with all staff members. It's your duty as an employee of a service to follow organisational policies and procedures and to work within their assigned job role, as well as meeting service standards and following ethical principles. An organisation requires resources relevant to the work they undertake. The organisation also requires information from the client that is receiving the services about their situation, needs, goals, and other relevant factors that will impact on the case management process and planning. Having an understanding of family structure and its dynamics is important. This also includes times where a client's family may not be present or participating in the client's life. A family's influence is significant. Family is where we usually develop our views of the world, as it is the first social group we have contact with. From family, we develop values, beliefs, and develop an understanding of how things should be done. The relationships we have with our family are extremely powerful and have long-lasting effect on us through our lifetime. The roles within family impact on the dynamics and how family members communicate with each other. Behaviours of family members may change dependent on their role at various times. It's important to note there are times where the relationships between support workers and family members can be fragile due to misunderstandings by both parties. It's important to be aware that in any supporting role, there is an imbalance of power. Service providers may sometimes feel that they are the experts or may make assumptions on what makes a good family. Some workers can be judgmental when it comes to families, labelling them either cooperative or difficult when assessing the family's ability to comply with the worker's wishes or instructions. To note, parents have the right to obtain legal advice at any stage of an intervention relating to child services. Parents also have the right to participate in the decision-making process. Within the Charter of Care Recipients' Rights and Responsibilities for Care Home, it is a family's right to participate in deciding the best care that will address the needs of the person. It is up to the family to provide appropriate, timely, and relevant information to the service provider to ensure that the best care plan can be developed and delivered. Rights and responsibilities will be seen differently, as there are a number of cultures and different families. It's important to note that family is not a primary focus of a support plan. A family can provide support and insights into the client's needs. Involving family in a case management plan must be undertaken carefully and sensitively with your client's permission. It's important for both workers and families to establish good working relationships. As long as each party understands that all have something to contribute and that they each have a different relationship with the person, and that everyone is attempting to achieve the best possible outcome. It is important to note that it takes time to establish a good working relationship and solid commitment from all parties concerned. Within a case management plan, the community has needs, responsibilities, and rights that must be taken into consideration. The community has a right to safety as well as a secure environment. It bears the responsibility to make sure that it does not disadvantage those within the community or sets restrictions on those in the community in any manner. At times, as a case manager, you'll be required to balance the needs, responsibilities, and rights of the community with the rights of the person receiving support. To ensure all responsibilities and boundaries are clear, you might find it necessary to involve a community member in the case management meeting. A case management plan has the ability to be quite simple and short-term, or the case management plan can be quite complex and long-term. A case management plan is organic. Therefore, it has the ability to change according to the needs and goals of the client. An appropriate case management plan should therefore also be flexible. When developing a case management plan, you should always address relevant cultural, social, and structural factors to ensure the plan is appropriate. Remember, when you are developing a case management plan, it should always be developed with the client receiving the services as well as other stakeholders involved. Collaborative approach, inclusiveness, self-determination, empowerment. That's why we have the client working alongside us, not behind us or not just being provided with information. Remember, the client is the main stakeholder and has the right to make his or her own decisions relating to their self-identified needs and goals. By working together, collaboratively, it displays that each party that is involved in the case management planning has something to contribute and that they are all equally valued. When working in case management, it is imperative that your client is empowered to develop and keep hold of as much independence and control over their own life as possible. As a case manager, there are certain requirements that you will have to have, and they consist of things like strong communication skills, good conflict resolution skills, good negotiation skills, and also the ability to work collaboratively. So when you are undertaking assessment, a needs assessment may require more than one session, depending on the client. An assessment supports the case manager to understand a client's needs, strengths, goals, as well as the resources available to them. This in turn provides information on the supports required. To make sure you have a sound understanding of your client's needs, you have to use an approach that is at a level that is appropriate for your client. To do this, you will need to speak to your client to identify their medical needs, living environment, functional requirements, and financial situation, just to name a few areas that may be required to be discussed. The more needs of your client, the more comprehensive the case management plan will be required to be. If your client's needs are quite simple and short-term, the case management plan may not be required to be approached in the same manner as a person in crisis or a client with underlying issues. It is sometimes possible to determine the complexity of the case management plan from the initial assessment. Strengths-based case management focuses on the individual's strengths of the client, as well as their skills they already possess. These strengths and skills can be used as building blocks, starting points, to assist in the development of a case management plan. Using this type of approach accepts that a person isn't defined by their problem, diagnosis, or illness. Instead, a person is defined by their ability to grow and change. Supporting a person to identify and recognize their own strengths and abilities is a necessary part of the assessment process. The information gathered can be utilized to work out the case management approach. A client's abilities are defined as skills that can be used to support the capacity to undertake tasks. A large part of case management involves working with a client to identify and recognize their abilities. By supporting a client to identify their abilities, as well as providing support and encouragement, supports a client to realize what they are capable of, empowers and encourages independence. By identifying a client's capability of undertaking tasks, provides insight that can be utilised to assist in the case management process. An important part of developing an appropriate case management approach involves allowing the client to identify and set their own goals. Goals should always be SMART. If you don't know what SMART is or what the acronym stands for, it's specific, measurable, achievable, attainable, realistic, and timely. What is required to achieve goals is required to be taken into consideration, such as the geographical location and availability of workers to service the client's needs. Once a set of goals has been identified or established, they are used to inform the case management plan. There are two types of goals that may be identified. The first type are process goals, which are activities or habits that support achieving outcomes, such as see a psychologist once a week for a period of 8 weeks. The second are outcome-based goals, which focus on the desired outcome, such as achieve better mental health. So once the initial assessment has been undertaken and completed, you are required to continue to work with your client to work out the most appropriate way to develop the case management plan. Provide your client with enough time to review all of the information you have provided with them. Once all of the information has been gathered and your client has decided on a path they wish to take, it should then be decided if your service is the best suited to meet the client's needs, or if another agency requires to take on the lead role. When developing the case management plan, it is a requirement that referrals and networks require consideration as to who can provide the best service and the most practical response. It is important that you work to meet the most urgent needs first by offering actual assistance, especially if this is a crisis situation. There will be clients that will require more intensive intervention in the commencement of the case management process to address those initial needs, with the intensity of support reducing as their situation improves. A client may require support at transition points and may need several sessions to obtain appropriate support. There will be clients that have complex needs that will require frequent support and contact with the case manager. Once the case management approach has been established, you can then develop the case management plan. So an initial needs assessment is required to be able to identify and prioritise a client's needs so that an appropriate plan can be put into place to address those needs. The plan should utilise the information gathered in the initial assessment with the aim of providing assistance to the client. The plan should also include how the worker and client are going to work together, what the service can provide, and what external services will be required to meet the client's needs. A case management plan is required to be central and be inclusive of the roles and responsibilities of all people involved in the support plan. It must also include a main goal and the steps required to achieve the goal. Barriers that may present must also be addressed, and strategies to overcome these barriers must also be defined. Actions that are required to be undertaken. Who is going to be responsible for the actions? Other agencies that are required, and any specialist needs or requirements must also be documented. It is during the development stage that research should be undertaken to find out the availability and ease of access to other agencies or services.